Okay, perfect. Okay, so the date is April 12th, 2021. And the interviewer is Kathy Shu, she, her, hers. And the interviewee is Davis Bailey, she, her, hers. And do you consent to video and audio recording that will eventually be available on a public website?
I do.
Perfect, thank you. And the first question that we're going to start off with is, what role has imagination and or fantasy played in your life? How has it been formative for you?
I think that for my whole life, I've kind of just had like it's had like a big impact. I've spent a lot of my time, like elementary, middle school, high school, reading, usually like fantasy or young adult books. And then I've also played a lot of video games based in all of those different different sorts of settings. And I don't know, I just kind of I like to think about like what could be. I know it's not very like logical, but I'm kind of a dreamer. I've always been kind of like an idealist. So I just like to think about like, oh, what would it be like if I had superpowers, or what would it be like if I lived in Middle Earth or something like that. And I just think it gives me like a nice creative outlet because it's also inspired me to like pick up some like art, even though I'm not very good, but it allows me to try. And it's made me some friends over the years too. So
Amazing. What types of like literature did you read? What types of like fantasy, YA?
um in middle school I read a lot of like the dystopian stuff just because that was like I don't know what it's called, like in style, I don't know, popular. And then in high school, I kind of moved on to like Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series. It's just kind of like it takes place in like a fantasy world, and then there's like a continent where like magic is forbidden, and then the main character is trying to like undo that and figure out the secrets of her past. And it's just a lot of like fantasy and battles, and there are like fairies and elves, and it's just really cool.
Oh yeah. So you talked a lot about like how you like to think about what could be. Are there like, could you like describe like the types of things that you would imagine for yourself?
Um, I feel like if I like every time I play a video game, I kind of always make myself like a mercenary type person, like kind of like big and strong, and I have like a lot of armor and like axes and stuff. So I don't know, I just kind of think it would be cool to be somebody like really like big and physically strong, be able to like protect people and help people with their problems. So I think I tend to just like imagine myself in that type of like archetype throughout what I think about worlds I imagine myself in.
Cool. And I'm wondering about like, I don't know, like what types of like worlds that you're imagining rather than like how you're imagining yourself, like what type of a, and it doesn't have to be like a single world, like any of the worlds that like you've been imagining for yourself, like what elements are there, what types of beings, or like how do you interact with the world and the other people there?
Um, Usually I kind of have to create like a balance of power before I kind of create the world because I don't want to be like overpowered, you know. But I usually sometimes I'm like in worlds that already exist, like different like anime universes, say like Haikyuu or One Piece or something like that. But then like other times it's just kind of like a I don't know, just like a random world. Like I've created this little country. It's kind of like more like modern Viking type things. And so it's like really cold, and then there are like a bunch of like wizards, and um everybody has like a raven that they use for like communication and stuff to carry things back and forth. And there are dragons that we ride on instead of horses. So it's just like that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool. Are there when you think about like random worlds, you mentioned like ravens to communicate or like riding dragons. What do you see like I'm kind of just thinking about like how you are as like this person who's like like here that's supposed to be like physically strong and like protective. If you could talk more about like how you interact with like the other beings that might be there, the other people, like what's your role in this world?
Um, Usually I'd be in some sort of like position of power, or like I would be the right hand to somebody in a position of power. That's probably more likely. And I would just kind of like serve as like a bodyguard for them. And then I would also like interact with like the people that are like within like other towns and stuff, and kind of be like a negotiator as well as like a physical protector, I guess. And then yeah, I think
Cool. I'm curious to like hear more about like the power structures that you're
oh
imagining. Like
gosh.
you mentioned, like, that like this is clearly like important to you that you have like the power like structure decided before you like create the world. So like if you talk about like the different like the different power structures that you've imagined and like why you like choose one over the other, or like what are the like, like
Okay.
similarities, differences.
Mhm. I mean, I kind of use like the game Skyrim as like a base because I've played that too many hours of that. Um, I kind of like in Skyrim, you can either be like a kind of like an assassin type person. You can use like light armor and be sneaky, and then or you can be a heavy armor person that uses bigger weapons, or you can be a magic user or a combination. And so I just kind of limit like the people or the characters that I create, or like myself, to only being able to do one of those things, just so like say there was a princess and the royal family has like a gift that they inherit, so like she can only use that, and then she is not really skilled in like the other areas, I guess. So it's just kind of like a problem of like giving different beings and characters different levels of, I don't know, like different levels of power and the different scales.
And, like, what do you imagine are like the different powers that like people would have?
Mostly just like elemental type powers. I really like when like media has elemental power structures, like um whether that be like the Avatar: The Last Airbender thing with the fire, water, earth, air, or just like anything with like ice or lightning. I just think all of that's really cool. So I think it would be more so like elemental powers than things like telekinesis or teleportation or like superpower type things.
And like what powers would you have for like yourself?
Um, I would probably have. I really like earth powers, like rocks. Like I would be an earthbender if I was in the Last Airbender universe, I think. But I just think that it kind of fits with like the type of character that I would see myself as. Like it's kind of like grounding and like strong and protective. So I just kind of resonate with earth.
Cool. Yeah. I'm wondering if you can like talk more about like how you imagine like in Avatar where like there are different like tribes, those like different like one of like the four elements, and then there's like the Avatar who's like
Mhm.
embodies all four. I'm wondering like how you envision your world with like how the elements interact, where if it's like a similar thing, or like if I don't know if they're used like harmoniously, or like, like what type of like relationships do like the people have together, and like if it's like tribal or this like gigantic community, or like, you mentioned like separate towns, that type of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah.
I think that it would be more like it wouldn't really be an organized tribes. Like different people within the same village could have like, or like town would have different like abilities, just so it would be more balanced throughout the world. Um, I haven't really thought about how they'd be like given out to people and like distributed, but I'll get there, I guess.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm wondering like where, if you can talk more about like, I don't know, like what, so obviously like, you've imagined this like kind of world for yourself. And I'm wondering like where this comes from, like what maybe like what parts of your like reality do you think are like um basically like what limits of your reality is this like imagined world in response to, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
um, I think I don't know. I grew up with a lot of rules. Like my household was pretty strict, so I think I've just kind of like always been kind of like kind of escaping to my imagination. Like, oh, I wish I could go do this, and it would just go to like a I guess like extremes if I was like imagining completely different worlds. But um, so I think that's kind of where it started.
Well, yeah. And we can talk more about like what do you think like what power and potential do you think that the imagination has for yourself? And that's like sort of similar, but
That's okay.
if you could expand more upon that.
I just think that like imagination kind of, I mean, it's such a broad thing, but I think that sharing like what you create with other people and then like bonding over it or like kind of bonding over things that already exist, like other like forms of media, I think it's just like a nice way to connect with people. And I think that it's just like it provides a good contrast to reality. Like I do like I like reality. It's pretty cool most of the time, but sometimes it's just nice to have like somewhere to like go and think about where things are different.
Yeah. And expanding more upon that, like what parts of like reality um do you tend to want to change?
Um, hmm, I mean, I think it's mainly like the monotony. I mean, especially in like this pandemic, it's kind of been like the same day over and over for like a long time. So I think it's just like with that potential for adventure or like journeys or peril, even, it just kind of like keeps you on your toes and then you never know what to expect. So it's like the opposite of monotony.
Well, yeah. Um, and this is like just going off, like wondering if, so we talked a little bit about like what personal like meaning it may have for you, but do you see that there's like any power and potential in imagination, like societally and like a bigger and like a larger scheme? Um, what the like importance of imagination might be?
I mean, I think everything that's come to be has been a result of somebody's imagination. So just like being creative and like using your mind to create things that don't exist is just kind of how we're going to keep progressing as a planet, as a society.
Yeah, and do you see, in any ways that, like, this kind of imagined world that you've created for yourself, do you see any ways that, like, it's influenced your own, like, reality? Like, I know that, like, you know, parts of so basically, like, your reality feeds into this imagination, but are there, like, any ways that this imagination then feeds back into your reality and you see, like, the effects of it?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've definitely like tried to take parts of like my like fictional self and kind of work those into my real personality. Like I've kind of I don't know, I see like my own personal growth as like character development sometimes. So I've just been trying to like develop and be like a more like I don't know, like noble. That's kind of cheesy, but like a more noble or like honorable person. And I think that like that's really common in like fantasy and um, other fictional worlds to be like strong and honorable. So I think that that would be nice to have in real life.
Cool, yeah. And in relation to that, so if given no real world restrictions, what would be the ultimate self or elements of it that you would imagine for yourself? I know you mentioned a little bit that you would want to be like physically strong, but if you could like, really describe to us what, Davis would look like, what Davis would, be doing.
Mhm. Um, I wouldn't really be doing anything if given the chance. Like, I would kind of wanna be like a mountain or something because they're just, like, so cool and so big and majestic, and they have, like, a lot of wildlife and a lot going on them, and there are a bunch of different types, but then they're just kinda like they're just kinda chilling, and I aspire to be like that.
Cool, yeah. Could you like describe more about like how as a mountain like you would like how you envision yourself like interacting with your surroundings like any other like I don't know if they're like animals, people or like
Mhm. I mean, like, I think that I would have like snow on the summit because I really like snow and I like all of the animals that live in the snow. Like my favorite animal is a polar bear. I know that's technically not on a mountain, but you can imagine. Um, I would have waterfalls to kind of like feed into the ecosystem surrounding. I like a lot of like the typical like forest animals. Like I really like bears and I like deer, so they could have like a little little ecosystem going on down at like the lower parts of the mountain. And then there would be some parts that are like steep cliffs and stuff, so people could like kind of like go rock climbing if they were like seeking adventure or something. So I would just kind of like to be like a mountain that could provide for like everybody or like every creature in the area.
Yeah, so like very like nurturing.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a really nice imagery. I'm also wondering, so I remember from like your survey response that you like mentioned that you would want to be like a warrior. I'm wondering if that's like still something that you would want to be or like if that like goes together with like the idea of a mountain.
Um, kind of. I wouldn't really. I don't know. Like I like the idea of like being strong and stuff, but I don't know like about like fighting in general. Like I don't think there's like a need to fight for no reason. So like maybe not like a warrior, maybe just somebody that like just like protects instead of like fights. I don't know if those can be like separate, but
No, that completely makes sense. Yeah. Um yeah, and I don't know if there's like anything else that you want to add in terms of like a mountain, like if you would be I don't know, like if you would be almost like a living mountain. Do you know what I mean? Like if you maybe like not necessarily, I don't know if you would want to be like, mountain as like how we view it, kind of like, this
mhm.
like very static thing, or if you would want to be like a mountain that's like very much so like it's a being, like almost like a spirit or like, some type of yeah, like living being kind of mountain.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. I think I like just kind of like the way that sometimes in like fantasy like trees have spirits and trees are like these like old wise beings. I feel like it would be something like that, right? And like aware of everything that's going on. Like I can't really like move because I'm a mountain, but I can kind of like observe everything and like feel everything that's happening.
Yeah, like maybe like parts of you would be able to move like like
Mhm.
your own landscape. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I really like that imagery. Um, I'm wondering like what parts of your life do you think like informs that imagined form? Like what parts of your reality now inform your wanting to be like this specific type of mountain?
Um, I'm kind of I don't know. I've always been kind of like a mom friend. So I just kind of I like watching out for people and I like taking care of people. And I have like a younger sister, so I'm kind of like overprotective, not overprotective, but like protective of her. And I don't know, I just like I would really like to just like be able to provide for people. I think there's something really fulfilling about that.
Yeah, and would this be the type of like I'm curious, like thinking more about like your world and what this might look like. Like, would there be like other mountain beings that you're kind of in like relationship with, or like would you be like the mountain, and then like there's like kind of this like ecology, like you said, that's like happening that kind of lives on you and that you nurture, or like does like all the like environment, I don't know, like all the natural elements, like are each of them a like living being that like lives like coexists with you?
I feel like I would be like the mountain, but I feel like if there were other things like really big trees or really big bodies of water, I feel like those could be embodied by other spirits, people that I could kind of interact with, just kind of with our like overlapping nature. Like if I had a waterfall and then the waterfall turned into a river and then went out into the ocean, then we could have like interactions through like the animals that move through that pathway and stuff like that.
Cool, yeah. And thinking more about like you mentioned that like you really like to take care of people. So like how do you another question, main question I have is like how do you enjoy loving and being loved? So if you could first start off by like talking about like how do you like to be loved by others? Like what are ways that you especially ways of love that you especially appreciate receiving?
I really like receiving like genuine compliments and just like people letting me know that like, hey, you're doing a good job, or like, I'm here for you, or like, I like being around you, stuff like that. And I also like when they are like kind of exhibiting their own creativity and they make like handmade like little art pieces. Like a lot of the things behind me are made by like my closest friends, and I just really appreciate that. And I think it's really lovely that they're able to create things like that and then share them with me.
Yeah. And turning that around, like, how do you enjoy loving people? What are like your favorite ways of expressing your love and care for others?
I like to, I mean, I just, especially now, I just like check in on everybody and like ask them how they're doing. And then I like to send them things that I think or that they think are funny because I like making people laugh as well. So I'm just like, oh, this made me think of you, or like, oh, look at this. And then I also like getting gifts for people that would either make them laugh or like make them happy.
Yeah. And another question would be like, how do you love yourself?
Um, I kind of just take breaks, take time for myself. Like today I had a test and then yesterday I had a test. So for most of the day I've just been like drinking tea and like journaling and reading. So I just kind of take time to wind down and like relax.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, in terms of like, um, if I were to visually represent you loving and being loved in the ways that you mentioned, the ways that you prefer, like, what are ways that you see these forms of love being materialized, whether it's in like actions or objects, like how do you see that like being embodied?
Mm. Um, Probably like, oh my gosh, this is gonna sound dumb. Like memes, if anything, because that's just kind of been like, they've just kind of been like a way of communicating in my friend group for a long time. So I mean, like if there was like a funny picture, like a reaction image, or something like that, or like we give each other a lot of like bracelets, like handmade bracelets with beads, and so I think things like that would represent.
I love that. That's really cute.
Thank you.
um, are there like any actions that you can think of in particular?
Um, hmm, I really like I really like hugs, so I give people a lot of hugs when I can, and then I like to we I used to make up handshakes with a lot of people. Like I have a really complicated secret handshake with my sister. And so, like, things like that, like handshakes and hugs.
Yeah, I love that. And I kind of want to go back to like talking about fantasy and like you mentioned especially that like you growing up like read like a lot of novels and YA fiction and I'm wondering if you can like share more about like any like memories that you had in terms of like fantasy that like maybe like really stick out or like are like especially like that like important and dear to you. if there are any like that.
Um, I don't know. I read the Harry Potter series in elementary school, and that kind of made a big impact just because it was like such like a huge universe, and it has like a lot of it's very widespread. And like I thought we went to like Universal Studios, we went to like the Harry Potter world a couple years after I read the series, and I was like blown away. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And like same thing with in middle school, I was more into like the Percy Jackson series and like mythology. So it's kind of like I've been able to like expand upon my like interest in that series, and I really like learning about like mythologies of different like ancient civilizations now and just history in general. So I think it's like I don't know, just like fostered growth in like my interests.
Yeah, and how do you see that like developing now? Like, how do you see like what's the role of like fantasy and imagination in your life now?
Um, I spend a lot of my free time drawing now. I think uh, I also like I'm not really sure what I want to major in, but I've been considering classics just because I think that archaeology is really cool. I mean, I know it's like a lot of work to like be an archaeologist, but I just think it would be really awesome to like find things that like people made all those years ago and just like those things almost feel like fantasy to me, like ruins and like old art. It's just really fascinating to me.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And I'm wondering if you could talk about like what do you think I like a lot of people once I asked them about like fantasy and their relationship with fantasy. A lot of them, like a lot of people immediately go to like literature and like media that they've consumed. And so could you talk a little bit more about like what you think like the effects of like media and literature are in being able to like um basically like how other people's imagination and like all these like other worlds that they've built, like these authors have built in return, like affect your own like imagination and like the worlds that you build.
A lot of the worlds that I build or are influenced by other worlds that already exist. It's kind of like I like to think about like worlds that already exist, and I would like to think about how I would live in them and how I would interact with other people within them. Um, and I just kind of, I mean, that's like a lot of what I do. Like I do make my own worlds, but sometimes I'm like, I wonder what would happen if I was a pirate, like in this universe. And then I try to like think about how it would fit into the story and like the power system and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I'm curious as to like what aspects you like. I don't know, maybe you could answer this question by like choosing like one of the worlds that you really like, and like what aspects of it do you decide to keep and what aspects do you decide to like remove, or like what aspects do you combine with that world like from another world, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Um, I don't know. Like, I think I'm just gonna use the anime Hunter x Hunter as an example because it's the first thing that popped into my head. But there's a really complicated power system called Nen in it, and like nobody really knows how it works. Like everybody that watches it is just like, yeah, Nen. So I mean, I like to think I understand it, but I don't. So I just kind of simplify it in my head. I'm like, yeah, this is how this is gonna work. And then a lot of that has to do with like physical combat as well. So it's like a combination of physical combat and like Nen, so power. And I like that balance, like of not just relying solely on power or solely on physical strength.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I watched Hunter x Hunter as well. And it's like, yeah, I have no idea what that's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm curious if there are like aspects to like the Hunter x Hunter world, for example, that like you may like not even want to include in your own like world building. You mentioned like the parts that like you want to include, but like what are parts that like you've changed for yourself?
Um, I mean, I would probably get rid of. that weird country that's like where like the Chimera ants came from because I didn't really I didn't really understand what was going on there. Like I would probably just kind of try to regulate things that don't really make a whole lot of sense. Like with the rest of the story and the power system, like if this is a different thing, but like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, sometimes the author would just like give this person another power out of nowhere, and I was like, where did that come from? So I just kind of, if there's not really like an explanation to it, then I don't really like to include it.
Cool. So like again, like everything has to be like, you need to be able to understand
Mhm.
it. Okay. I'm curious. This is like not this is just a small question. I'm curious, like, do the other people in the world have to like understand everything? Or like is it just more of a like important that like you understand everything?
I think it's just more important that I do. Like if I'm just gonna assume that like everybody in there knows what's going on already. It's just kind of more like setting guidelines for myself if I'm like gonna be the one world building. And like people in it don't have to know everything. It's not like in reality, like nobody really sits down and knows every history fact or everything about every location. So it's just kind of like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I don't know if there are like any more other like guidelines that you've thought of that like you'd want to have for your world.
Um, I don't know. I like to have different biomes in in worlds. I just like my main place is usually kind of cold or like rocky, and then I really like to have I like desert areas. I wouldn't want to live in one, but I like to have them there for exploration purposes. And I like big forests, and I don't know, I just like to include different biomes so it kind of feels more real, like if you're actually traveling around the world.
Cool. Yeah. And in that case, like, I don't know if there's like anything that like you want to add that like we haven't talked about in terms of like fantasy, imagination, or love.
Um, I mean, like I've made a lot of friends, like this is going off of love, I think. I've made a lot of friends through like my like love for just fantasy and like things in general. Like I've met a lot of people over the internet that I'm really good friends with now, and then I've just kind of like deepened other friendships that I already had because we can bond over things like this. And I just think that it's been like a really important part of my life, my whole life. Just kind of, I don't know, it's always been there. I couldn't really imagine like not being super into video games or fantasy or something like that. Kind of like a part of me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious as to like how maybe that like affects your like the world that you want to build. Like if you talked about how like maybe you would be in communication with like the other beings, like would they also have like um would they also have like imaginative powers that like are in collaboration with your world building so that like you're not the only one world building, or if you want to be the one world building.
I mean, I think once like the world is like mostly set, like I think that the other beings can just do whatever they want. Like if a tree wants to like grow really tall, like go ahead, man. Like I think it would be nice to let other like all the other beings in there just kind of live as they see fit because that's kind of just what I'm doing. So like it's not really my place to limit what others want to do.
Cool, yeah. And this is like the last question, just like wondering if like there's any like message that you would want to add for like anyone who's watching this.
Yeah, don't be afraid to express your interests because even if they seem like strange or weird, like I wasn't really open about liking anime because it sort of seems taboo until about like junior year. But I promise, like, if you're open about what you like and you kind of like share your love for it with others that you're close to, it'll kind of it'll spread most of the time. Like you'll make more friends that way, and then you'll kind of have more things that you can relate to people with. And so I just think that like if you really like something and if you consider it like a part of your identity, don't be afraid to express that.
Amazing. Yeah. I know I said that was the last question, but like based on your answer, I'm like curious if like you have anything that you want to add about like maybe the way that like you mentioned the way that like fantasy brings people together and like maybe if you have any thoughts about how like all these people who love fantasy may be existing in like a virtual space together and like how this space may be created and imagined.
A lot of the interactions I've had like online have been through Twitter, and it's really strange place. But I think like it's like a good place to like share opinions and interact with people. Like you can kind of just do whatever you want. Like you can people sometimes like will share their like original characters and stuff and share their art, share their writing. It's just like really nice to be able to see like what all these other people are creating based on the thing that you all like, because then everybody that likes it gets to enjoy it.
Yeah, perfect. Is there anything else at all that you would like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, of course.
Uh,